song is not.
Oh,
here we are.
Yeah, that song.
Sorry. Sorry, after again.
Of course.
I left it back there. Sorry. I didn't bring my handouts with me and being lazy. Thank you. She's a real supporter of the class.
I'd like to say hello to Mommy.
Stage mom, is what you're gonna call her.
Okay, Patricia, can you hear me? Patricia, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Would you like to turn your camera on now? We're just about ready to start.
Absolutely.
Lovely. Okay, just waiting for a couple of people to take their seats over there.
Sounds good. So I can't see your screen.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, I can't see. I can't see you all. I don't know if you want me to be able to see the room. I think Pietro needs to put his camera on.
I don't know if, I don't know if you'll just be able to see me.
Oh, there.
So it's whether.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Would you like to look at me or just? We don't have the option of showing you the room, I'm afraid. So.
Got it. No problem. No problem. No problem. As long as, yeah, this is good.
Okay, I think we'll just make a start. Okay, welcome back, everyone, to this. Okay, so welcome back, everyone, to this afternoon session. A little announcement to make. So we're making an exception because Professor Rosenmeyer is joining us online. We're not going to save questions or discussion of her paper till a round table some hours later when she won't be here, but we're going to have a discussion just for this paper, and then the rest of the session will carry on as normal. Patricia Rosenmeyer is a Paterson Distinguished Professor of Classics at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. She doesn't need much introduction to those of us who are experts in epistolography here, having published 3 books just in that field alone. The 2001 monograph that kind of started off epistolary studies for many of us, certainly for me, and the collection of the anthology of translated letters, and also the co-edited volume along with me on Greek epistolary narratives. She also has a couple of other monographs and another edited volume, a wide range of publications with interests in lyric poetry and reception studies. But of course it's a great pleasure for all of us epistolary students here to have her here to talk to us about, well, not to have her here unfortunately, but to have her here virtually to talk to us about epistolography some more. You should have a handout in front of you. There's no PowerPoint. Good, yeah. So her title is The Kandake Episode in the Alexander Romance, An Epistolary Seduction. Okay, over to you, Patricia.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Okay, wonderful. It's really a delight to be zooming in. I want to thank Tiziana and Owen for organizing, and I apologize for not being able to participate in the morning sessions because of the time difference. I think you started at 3 in the morning, or my time. So I apologize, and I also then need to go off and teach afterwards, so thank you. I also want to thank Ashley, who is with you, my emissary, if I can claim that, who was very helpful in conversations with me about my paper. So thank you, and I'm sorry I can't be there in person. So I'm going to talk about the Alexander Romance, which is the story of the life and times of Alexander the Great, king of Macedon. And the story was one of the most popular works in antiquity, and it was translated into 24 languages, and it surfaced in places as far apart as 5th century Armenia and medieval France. But we're still uncertain about its authorship and date, although it seems that stories about Alexander already began to circulate shortly after his death in 323 BCE. Sources may have included a biography, and of interest to us, several freestanding letter collections based on an actual epistolary exchange between Alexander and the Persian king Darius, as well as a separate group of longer letters addressed to his mother Olympias and his tutor Aristotle, describing marvels he saw on his wide travels. Other epistolary passages report Alexander's meetings with the Gymnosophists in India, excuse me, the Amazons, and Queen Kandake. And I'm going to focus today on the Kandake episode. So in Book 3 of the Alexander Romance, after his conquests of India and Persia, Alexander writes a letter to Queen Kandake requesting permission to visit her territory. She is the descendant of the mythical queen Semiramis, who, according to Diodorus, was the semi-divine daughter of a Syrian goddess and the wife of Ninos, who was the eponymous king of Nineveh. Kandake refuses Alexander permission in a letter to enter her territory, and her epistolary rejection inspires him to dress up as a messenger and attempt to deliver another letter in person. Kandake, having previously commissioned a painting of the king, recognizes Alexander as soon as he arrives, and she gloats that she has outwitted the great conqueror. While the narrator presents this exchange as primarily diplomatic, it could easily, I argue, provide the framework for a love affair. Letters sent between royal parties, a lover disguising himself to approach a forbidden beloved, and a cessation of epistolary exchange once the two are united. So my paper is going to explore the erotic tension that I see possibly present in this episode. So number 1 on the handout, according to a recent commentary by Krzysztof Nowotny on the Kandake episode, quote, "The original account of the Alexander romance is free of sexual overtones. Rather, he says it's built around 2 principal motifs, Alexander the trickster playing again the game of impersonating his ambassador, as in the episode of the embassy to Darius in Book 2, and Alexander searching for answers about his future." And I fully agree with the existence of the 2 main motifs, but I would push back against the wording of the first claim, referring to an original account and the lack of sexual overtones. While Ken Dowden may well be right to argue that the Kandake episode existed originally as a separate short novel, with or without embedded letters, we need to be cautious about searching for traces of origins. Right? The idea of an original account has been, I think, successfully countered by David Constan, who argued for an open text, a multi-layered tradition defined by compositional variation, with no original that can be discovered underneath or behind the different recensions. And as to the part of Nowotny's claim, the second part, I'm going to argue today that there are indeed sexual hints present in the Kandake episode that are brought to the fore precisely because of the epistolary content. And I think you all know that letters can certainly bring out something suggestive or different than what the text actually says. Letters between men and women in ancient literature often encourage us to expect some sort of erotic affair. We can think of Phaedra and her letter, or Ovid's abandoned women writing letters, or the heroines of the Greek novel. And I think this story is no exception. So since this segment of the Alexander romance might not be familiar to everyone, I'm going to go in some detail into Book 3, chapters 18 through 22. There are different recensions. I'm basing this on the Alpha recension, written in Greek with some additions in Armenian. As far as we know, this episode is completely fictitious, not based on any historical fact. And there's a combination of his other campaigns, his African campaigns, his Indian campaigns, and we're really unable to pin down, beyond Merowe, to pin down a really specific location for this episode in spite of the detailed descriptions. So I'll move to, I give you the sources on the handout, but I will now move to handout number 2. So in Book 3, Alexander has already conquered India and Persia, and he decides to visit Queen Kandake, ruler of Merowe, which is the kingdom of Kush in ancient Nubia and modern-day Sudan. So that much we can figure out, that geographical location. And the narrator sets the scene by describing Kandake as a very beautiful woman who is middle-aged, a widow, mother of 3 sons. So for me, that's already calling out some sort of erotic overtone, because we're introducing a female character who is very beautiful. So setting up something, whether Alexander sees the queen as a military conquest, potential erotic conquest, or in the manner of a Herodotean pastiche, as an illicit but irresistible attraction in the manner of Gyges and Kandali's wife. We're invited to see the queen as very beautiful, someone to be admired as a mother of grown sons, but also attractive enough to be gazed upon with pleasure without a husband who might protect her from suitors, in that regard, a kind of Penelope figure. But in his initial letter to the queen, Alexander claims to be impressed by rumors of the beauty of the palace, not the queen herself. He does not ask directly for a meeting, but rather presses her to send a statue of her ancestral god Ammon to the border of her land, where Alexander and his troops are stationed, so they might make a sacrifice to it. And coincidentally, archaeologists have identified a temple of Ammon-Re, built in the 7th century BCE, on a small hill opposite the royal palace, which is the place we're invited to imagine Alexander meeting Kandake. So number 3 on the handout, there's a lot of Greek. I'll just read the English. This is the first letter. King Alexander sends greetings to Queen Kandake in Meroe and to the rulers under her. When I was in Egypt, I heard of you from the priests there and saw your graves and dwellings, which showed that you had ruled Egypt for a certain time, and that Ammon made an expedition along with you. And after a short time, on Ammon's advice, you returned to your own city. This is the point of my sending a letter to you. Bring the shrine and statue of Ammon to the frontier so that we make a sacrifice to it. But if you do not wish to come with it, let us meet soon in Meroe and confer together. Send a letter back to me and let me know your wishes there. The queen answers with a letter of her own, handout number 4. Queen Kandake of Meroe and the rulers under her send greetings to King Alexander. So very nice epistolary openings. The endings are not as nice. In the past, Ammon gave an oracle that we should make a military expedition into Egypt. But now he has advised that he should not be moved and no one should come to me, and that we should protect ourselves from those who come to us and treat them as enemies. Do not make a mistake about our race. We are whiter in skin and more shining in soul than the whitest among you. We possess 80 phalanxes ready to attack those entering our land. You will do well by honoring divine Ammon. My ambassadors are bringing you 100 solid bricks of gold, 500 young Ethiopians, 200 parrots, 200 sphinxes, and for our god Ammon, who presides over the boundaries of Egypt, a crown of emeralds and whole pearls, 10 chains with seals attached, 8 ivory caskets. And I won't go through the rest of the list, but you can see there are a lot of wild beasts, elephants, leopards, rhinoceroses, panthers, man-eating dogs. I don't know what kind of gift that would be, but 300 bulls, elephants, tusks, and so forth and so on. And then the ending, send at once the men whom you wish to receive these gifts and write us when you have conquered the whole civilized world. So Queen Kandake's letter is a curious mixture of flattery and threats. She outright refuses his request to send him the statue of Ammon, saying that an ancient oracle commanded her never to move it from Meroe. It's apparently also prophesied that no foreigner should approach her city, and that she should treat such potential visitors as aggressors to be driven back by force. On the other hand, her long list of gifts seems to reflect a kind of material diplomacy, acknowledging his power and his royal status. Jackie Arthur Montaigne has suggested that this long enumeration of gifts may be construed as an attempt to convince the reader, inundated with excessive details, of the authenticity of the pseudo-document. And I think that's a really great observation. We may also be reminded of the elaborate displays of exotic animals in Hellenistic parades. This massive amount of exotic animals. Kandake warns Alexander not to underestimate her power. The kingdom has phalanxes of soldiers ready to attack, and she completely short-circuits his request for a meeting and concludes without a conventional or polite epistolary farewell phrase. She says, send at once the men, right when you've conquered the whole civilized world. There are so many other versions of the Alexander romance, and I think it's worth pointing out that the Syriac version offers a slightly different, less antagonistic wording. It ends with the customary epistolary chaire at the end. It says, and I'm sorry, this is not on your handout, you therefore have done well, since you have proposed this in honor of God Ammon, but if you desire to offer sacrifices to the god Ammon, come alone and let no army come with you. Chaire, farewell. That's almost the version that he does follow in our A recension, because he's about to go alone. But this initial letter exchange leaves us at a standstill. Each side has claimed the upper hand, neither seems willing to compromise. The queen suggests that he may answer her letter, but only once he's become ruler of the whole world, which that might be Alexander's ambition, but it's an unlikely scenario. But Alexander is not one to reject tribute, so he sends someone to receive the gifts and ignores her warnings to stay away. And we then get a brief digression, which I identify as the second hint that encourages readers to expect some sort of romantic liaison reminiscent of other Greek novels. And this is number 5 on your handout. Now Kandake, after hearing about Alexander, how many cities he'd stormed and how many kings he'd overcome, spoke to one of her artists, a Greek man, and ordered him to travel as if he sought a meeting with him, and surreptitiously to paint a portrait of Alexander, and on his return to give it to her, and on receiving it, she put it in a secret hiding place. Why does Kandake want a picture of Alexander? The narrative implies that she's impressed by his military exploits. But later we're told that it's a secret hiding place, and that secret hiding place she chooses is actually her bedroom, where we imagine that she can gaze upon it at night. And this might remind us of the odd circumstances in Heliodorus' novel, Aethiopica, where the Ethiopian princess Chariclea is born with white skin, which she mentioned in her first letter, after her mother gazed upon a painting of Andromeda during the moment of conception. So that context suggests that Kandake may have other interests in Alexander's portrait that relate more to romantic or sexual attraction. She claims not to want him to come to her country, but she's curious enough about the man that she sends a spy to paint his portrait. We could see this as a military strategy, sort of wanting to know what he looks like, since she suspects that Alexander won't obey her commands, and she tries to get ahead of him in their game of wits, much as in the episodes where Alexander and Darius exchange letters and challenge one another to read between the lines of their correspondence. It's worth noting that on the Darius campaign, I'd kind of forgotten when I was writing this paper, Darius also asked for a portrait to be painted of Alexander. And there I think it's more of an attempt to strategize and learn more about his enemy. But I think the gender complication here of a woman asking for a man's portrait and the epistolary exchange add another level to this supposed diplomatic engagement. So another digression follows, and this gets a little complicated because disguises are involved. We're told that Alexander, in the meantime, was instrumental in saving one of the queen's sons, very curiously named Candaules. So he saved Candaules and his wife from a raiding party, but he did not reveal his identity. So Candaules wants to reward his savior, but he doesn't know who he is, and so he addresses instead the person he thinks who is the king, who is actually Ptolemy, the second in command, and this is Ptolemy Soter, Ptolemy the first, king of Egypt, later. Ptolemy volunteers Alexander, identified as a bodyguard by the name of Antigonus, as a representative of the king, and then Candaules invites this Antigonus to go together with him to see his mother in Meroe, Kandake, where she will reward him for his bravery. Number 6 on the handout, Ptolemy, playing the role of Alexander, says, "I wish to salute your mother in a letter. So take Antigonus," that is Alexander, "with you as my messenger, and send him back again safely, just as I restore both yourself and your wife to safety." And he, Candaules, said, "King, I take this man with me as if he were Alexander himself." Of course, we know he is. "And I will send him back to you with royal gifts." Alexander had used this trick before in book 2. He had a dream where Ammon told him to disguise himself as a messenger and approach Darius to challenge him in battle, because Darius wasn't engaging in the war. And Alexander was received by Darius inside the palace, treated to a lavish meal, but a Persian prince had recognized him. He'd met him before. And Alexander has to make a hasty exit before he's exposed and killed. So this episode is like a doublet, but it's with Kandake, with a woman. So when Alexander, disguised as the messenger Antigonus, reaches Meroe, carrying a letter that we'll never learn anything about, from Ptolemy pretending to be Alexander, he's welcomed by the queen and treated to a royal banquet. And the next morning, number 7 on the handout, we see her through Alexander's eyes. On the next day, Kandake appeared wearing her royal crown, appearing as a very tall woman with something divine in her appearance, so that Alexander seemed to see his own mother, Olympias. So this is pretty suggestive. With the name Candaules, who invites another man to approach a beautiful woman in what turn out to be deceptive circumstances, we're led again to think of that passage in Herodotus. And it's worth remembering that Herodotus was one of the earliest Greek authors who used embedded letters in his narrative, often putting them in the hands of disguised messengers to pass through enemy territory to reach their intended addressees. Another direction our minds might go is towards Greek tragedy, especially the Theban cycle. I don't know how much I want to push this, but when Alexander sees her in the light of day, wearing her crown, standing tall, he seems to see his own mother. And in the next moment, Kandake takes him by the hand and leads him into her bedroom. More on that in a minute. Returning to the moment when Alexander finds himself in front of the queen, we're treated to a lengthy catalog of all the marvels found in the palace. And at this point, we kind of expect the queen to reward this messenger with gifts and send him back to his territory, but we shift from a scene of public reception to a private encounter between a man and a woman in the interior rooms of the palace. At one level, she's showing Alexander had said he wanted to see the palace, and so she's showing the messenger the beauties of the palace to tell Alexander. But at another level, we see Alexander led by the hand by a beautiful woman into a gorgeously designed set of rooms that are explicitly identified as belonging to her dead husband. And we're told later that she's already seen through the disguise. And she knows very well that this is the king of Macedon and not the messenger Antigonus. Passage 8 on your handout. Candaules called his mother, asked her to give the messenger gifts. At once Kandake took Antigonus by the hand and showed him rooms gleaming with shining stone. Among them was a dining room, a triklinos, or a room with 3 couches, made of perfect wood. The house had been built not with a foundation fixed upon the ground, but supported by huge columns. It was pulled on wheels by 20 elephants. And wherever the king went to make war in a city, he lived in this. So these are her dead husband's rooms. And at this critical juncture, Alexander seems to forget, for an instant, the role he's playing as humble messenger and insults the queen by saying that the wonders of Meroe would be more appreciated among his own Greek countrymen, where colorful stones and expensive woods are less common than they are in Kandake's land. And Kandake loses her temper and says, I've known all along that you're the king because I have a portrait painted in secret by one of your spies, and this is number 9 on the handout. Alexander says, all these beautiful things would be more impressive, I'll paraphrase, in our land because we don't have all the beautiful mountains of varied colors that you have here. And Kandake became angry and said, you're right, Alexander. He turns away and she says, why are you turning away? And he said, well, my name is Antigonus. I'm the messenger of Alexander. And she says, even if you are called Antigonus, with me you are King Alexander, and I will prove it to you right now. And taking him by the hand, she led him to her bedroom and said, do you recognize your portrait? Why do you tremble? Why are you troubled? You, the sacker of Persia, the conqueror of the Indians, the man who threw down the trophies of the Medes, and so forth and so on. Learn, Alexander, that if any man thinks he's supreme in wisdom above all men, another man another person or woman, will show greater wisdom than his. And I think I put on the handout that recension B adds a final sentence: Kandake's mind has been more than a match for your ingenious plans, Alexander. I struggle a bit with the Greek here, and I'll be curious to see if anyone has any ideas. There are two recent translations. I'm using a very old translation. The two recent translations by Reardon and Stoneman omit in English the possessive adjective, or the adjective autes, the bedroom of her, and simply say, she took him by the hand into a chamber, led him into a room. They don't emphasize the definition of bedroom that I'm using, and also that it's hers, it's autes. So don't know how far to push that, but I am pushing it. Alexander responds with anger and wishes he had his sword with him so he could first kill her and then himself, because he says he betrayed himself by allowing her to see through his disguise. The queen reassures him that she'll keep his secret. This is number 10 on the handout, because she owes him a debt for saving her son. And she says, I will also make sure that among the barbarians you're not Alexander, for if they knew you are, they would kill you, because you're the one who killed one of her son-in-laws. So be called Antigonus, I will guard your secret. So the king, caught in a compromising situation by a powerful woman who appears almost godlike, right? There was something divine in her appearance, imagines reaching for his sword to threaten his opponent, but she finds a less violent solution to their encounter, and the two become temporary allies. In Homer, on Circe's island, under similar circumstances of a threat of death by sword and recognition of the visitor, that allyship involves sexual intimacy afterwards. For Alexander and Kandake, it does not, but again, I'm not suggesting a real sexual encounter between the two. I'm just suggesting that the narrator wants his readers to remember precedents that suggest alternative eroticized endings. In the next section, the king's identity is kept secret. Kandake's two sons begin to argue over his fate, and Alexander, because they want to kill the messenger, and Alexander disguised as Antigonus says, what's the point in killing the messenger? You know, King Alexander has lots of messengers. You should send me back and tell the king, bring another letter to the king that he should come in person to receive the promised gifts. And in that way, when the real Alexander arrives, they can reward Antigonus with the gifts. And Kandake is very impressed by his ingenuity of still pretending to be the messenger. And she, number 11 on the handout, she marvels at his intelligence and says, I wish you were my son. You have taken the cities not by war, but by great strategy and epistolary strategy, right? So he was pleased, he was being protected, and she kept the secret. In the Armenian version, 3 further sentences are inserted, and this is number 12. She warns him against acting as his own letter carrier. She says, be safe now, and I will keep my secret, but I advise you hereafter not to trust yourself to be your own messenger unless you want to be like those who are trying to commit suicide. So he departs after a few more days and presumably brings a letter to Ptolemy as Alexander, and also takes all the expensive parting gifts from the queen, and that's the end of that section. So I want to conclude with some comments specifically on the effects of epistolarity in this episode. By taking on the role of messenger for his own letters, Alexander plays with several layers of doubling. Both the disguised man and the letter itself represent Alexander, but the man and the letter are sent as part of a strategy to protect the real Alexander from harm at the hands of his enemy. There's a sense that Alexander relishes the game, showing how easily a letter and a messenger can trick addressees into believing in the authority and authenticity of the bearer. And you all know this very well from letter material in antiquity. But Kandake, as she warned him, is not to be underestimated. And so thanks to her initial curiosity, maybe about his military conquest, maybe about the man himself, she has in her possession a visual representation that captures the appearance of the king, and she can match that image, that picture, with the man who stands before her. So she connects a true representation, an accurate representation with its authentic model, whereas the letter delivered by the fake messenger is never delivered or read. It just disappears, right? The letter is a plot device, a way to move the action, but it just disappears once it served its purpose to get the messenger into the palace. So we're used to thinking of the letter as a portrait of the soul in some of our theorists. It ought to reflect the truth. But in this case, all of that loses out to this one visual portrait of the real king. The letter that Alexander disguised as messenger carries to Kandake lies by implication, because a letter would suggest that the author is absent when he's really standing in person in front of his addressee. So much of what I've suggested today is speculative, but my sense is that the existence of epistolary communication between a man and a woman in the context of an ancient novel, complicated by the disguise of the male character and the beauty and intelligence of the female character, calls out for a closer look. And I suggest that there's an underlying risk in the story of a successful epistolary seduction. Whether Alexander or Kandake is the seducer is still unclear to me, but together they seem to be playing a potentially dangerous game, and the narrator takes great pleasure in teasing us with different possible outcomes. Will someone see through the Antigonist disguise and kill the messenger, Alexander? Will Alexander, like Odysseus, settle down with the beautiful godlike creature and cease his wanderings and conquests, thus losing his identity as king? Will Kandake, the beautiful foreign queen on the African continent, eventually be betrayed by Alexander as conqueror, as Dido was by Aeneas, and kill herself in despair? Our narrator ends the section with a whimper instead of a bang, as Alexander returns to his troops, reclaims his royal identity, and sets off to visit the mysterious Amazons. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patricia. That was wonderful. So we'll have about 10 minutes for questions in the room, and we've got a roving mic. I think if anyone in the room wants to ask a question. I'll just kick off with one, if I may. If there are erotic undertones, what do we do with the Oedipal undertones in the reference of handout 8 and handout 11 of her being compared to his mother?
Yeah, I love that suggestion. I would say that you can have both, right? I mean, the Oedipal aspect is also, it's still sexualized and erotic. And so, yeah, and so whether it's, whether it's towards a mother figure or towards, you know, the novel usually has, as you know, similar ages. They're usually young, they're usually both beautiful, so it's not quite that. They both seem to me to be, I mean, we know he's young, but they both seem to be trying to be equals in their strategizing, their military strategizing, but I wasn't sure how far to push the Oedipal. But I think my emphasis is still that it's sexualized, whether it's his mother or not his mother figure.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have a question in the room? Just while people gather. Oh no, here we have one. Can you wait for a microphone? Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I would like to know what.
Yeah, it doesn't work relaying from the microphone in the room.
Oh. We can also use the chat feature if you want. Oh, okay. Hi.
Thank you very much for your talk. I would like to know how does politics and seduction, how are they constructed, or how are they meeting in this episode?
So, yes. So how does the political aspect and the erotic aspect, how do they work together? Is that, yeah. I think that I see the erotic part as more, not digressions, but parts that are brought in at certain times to kind of make things more interesting. I mean, with Darius, that's very political, but then there's also a marriage or an erotic aspect later with the wife and the daughter. So I think that we're definitely meant to read this as political. There's a queen and a king, and they're arguing over territory, and that's why I was going back to the Darius episodes and how this can be kind of a doublet. So I think they go in parallel, but to my mind, when there's I guess I'm looking at the female character more as an eroticized object than as another male ruler where politics is sort of the most important part. So I think the politics is there, but then there's an extra kind of level of how different is it when a man and a woman are arguing over power. And can we ever have that argument over power without some sort of element of a gendered approach and therefore a sexualized approach? I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Sorry for the inconvenience of having to come up front.
Antonis is approaching Ponteropoulos.
Oh, good.
Hi, Patricia.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you very much for your talk. It was fascinating, and I was also reconsidering the sexual aspects. I was thinking a bit of this seduction model and the letters, of course, as you've described her. And I thought about the Cleopatra episode, for instance, or Cleopatra in imperial literature. Would that work as a parallel that he uses this kind of dynamics, gender dynamics between Cleopatra and other Roman politicians, and she is a seductress, so to say?
Yes, I love that. And you're the expert in the female voice in these things, but I think you're right. I think, I mean, I don't mean to say that a woman can't just be a ruler, but somehow in our literature that there's always that suggestiveness. And again, I'm not saying anything happens, but I think there's always this playful sense of, can you see a female character in ancient literature without seeing the gender, a major component. So yes, I think Cleopatra is a great example. It's diplomatic, it's military, she has her own power, but we also can use her gender and her femininity as a tool and a weapon in a way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Perhaps one more question in the room if we have another. So yeah, I had another question as well. So you mentioned the hypothesis of an entirely epistolary text before any of the versions that we have. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts on how this particular episode plays out if we accept that hypothesis. That's
a great question. I haven't thought through as much, how much could be done in letters, how many letters will just exist as an envelope and not actually be read. It's a great question. I'll throw it back on you. Do you have ideas?
I don't have any
Yeah,
theories, no, but I mean, it's something that
yeah.
that definitely needs to be kind of thought about in this context, because it's something that, as you said, is it's partly why I think you've thought of this episode as eroticized, because, as you mentioned, of erotic epistolary exchanges in novels, but there are also obviously these kind of epistolary letter collections that are romantic exchanges without a surrounding narrative. But yeah, how would this particular one, could it work without surrounding narrative?
That's a great question. I wasn't fully getting that right. So are these, if it is freestanding, be embedded, or would they be just straightforward letters like where we just, that's a great I'll think about that more. Yeah.
Thank you. So I will wrap up this part of the session for now. Let's thank Professor Rosenmeier once again for a wonderful talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.
So you're going to do the hand up, yeah? Okay, so while the handout's being put on the screen, I'll start introducing our next speaker. So Elizabeth Mattingly-Connor is a Roman historian studying aristocratic self-presentation and the transformations of Hellenism in the later Roman Greek East. She's worked as a lecturer since 2015 and researcher in the Department of History at the University of Maryland, College Park. She's currently working on a book manuscript mapping a late antique republic of letters that will investigate the enduring but fluid role of classical culture as an implement of patronage, leadership, and intellectual sociability in the letters of under-examined Christian literati from the Greek East. And she's going to talk to us about some of those today in her paper, Eros Compels My Prattling, Same-Sex Desire in the Letters of Procopius and Aeneas of Gaza.
Thank you, Owen, for that introduction. Can everybody hear me okay? I want to be centered on the mic, okay? Thank you so much to all of the conference organizers for this wonderful event, for all of the tremendous efforts that we're not even seeing, but to make this beautiful event. Or maybe not. Okay. Sorry. Maybe, sorry. Thank you also to the organizers for your support of me, bringing me here from the States. And so today I'm going to be talking about a couple of letter authors from the Roman city of Gaza. And these are some pretty non-canonical authors in the sense that they're not very well known. So I'll try to present a lot of background information as we go. Now my handout is a bit sparing, so I've tried to kind of only contain like the tastiest morsels of these letters on the handout, and I'll continue to kind of share a bit broader translations in my paper. So the handout kind of distills the sauciest language, so to speak. Okay, so I want to explore with you today these understudied letters, the epistolary of Christian sophists, Procopius, not to be confused with Procopius of Caesarea, the historian, and Aeneas of Gaza, both of whom are 5th to 6th century figures, more from the Common Era. More on that in a second. And I want to elucidate also an understudied topic, the role of same-sex erotic language as a mechanism of patronage, friendship, and intellectual exchange among late ancient aristocrats of the Greek East, and especially Christian aristocrats of the late Greek East. These Christian leaders flourished in a thriving center of rhetorical study in an age of transition, the final centuries of Roman rule in the Greek East, and they were urban leaders and influential gatekeepers within networks of Hellenic and Christian literati active in Alexandria, Antioch, Berytus, or modern Beirut, and the cities of Roman Palestine, all 3 provinces of them by this time. The elder of the two, by at least a generation, was Aeneas, and he lived from around 430 to 520, give or take. And he was a teacher of rhetoric who, as far as we know, held the chair of city sophist at Gaza. He has a surviving sort of anthology of letters that are number 25 extant. But he also wrote a Platonic dialogue entitled the Theophrastus, which is a Christian polemic. The Theophrastus is designed to strike down elements of Platonic thought at odds with Christian doctrine, notably Proclus's defense of the eternity of the world. Procopius of Gaza was active from the reign of Anastasius to that of Justinian. So he's taking us just up to the eve of Justinian. So around 465 to 530 are his dates. And he was also a city sophist. We have kind of more clear evidence of that role in his letters. And his surviving writings include 174 letters and also a rich variety of rhetorical and sophistical works, some of whom Anna talked about earlier today, and also biblical commentaries. He wrote a variety of catenae, so wrote a lot of, quite a varied corpus. So, in a changing Roman administrative landscape in which the long-established cultural authority of Greek learning and texts fell increasingly to Christian attack, the letters of the Gazan sophists underscore the role of Hellenism as an essential toolkit of social networking, which continued to shape the social and political administration of a Christianizing society. In this context, Procopius and Aeneas emerge as urban leaders and regional leaders who contributed to the soft power and provincial administration by lobbying via letters to advance the causes and ease the suffering of students, fellow intellectuals, fellow citizens, both affluent and humble. The distilled content of these letters, often devoid of historical specificities, part of why they have kind of been ignored a bit, the distilled content of these letters preserve the normative ideologies resonant with urban literati, Christian and non-Christian, in the Greek East, as well as the template mechanisms and concerns of late antique persuasion and mannered sociability. Drawing upon Greco-Roman rhetorical traditions used in civic contexts and in encomiastic oratory, erotic speech confirmed the worthiness of an interlocutor among the urban elite. In this approach, same-sex desire in these letters emerges as a component of the display of archaizing masculine authority among urban practitioners of paideia. So let's turn to look first at the use of erotic speech in the selected author's writings more generally, and then the letters. Procopius is particularly fond in the letters of swearing upon the erotes, or the cupids, in expressions of emotional intimacy and affection to his addressees. And both he and Aeneas use erotic terminology, of course, arestes and ramenas, respectively, to refer to themselves and their students, as well as friends and colleagues. The Gazan epistographers articulate their affection for each other, for their interlocutors, in terms of eran, eras, pathos, pathen. Interlocutors can also accrue a form of social capital in the form of filtron, in the form of sort of love charm, by means of letters. Erotic speech in this context derives from references to classical texts and themes characteristic of the literary mimesis of the second sophistic, yet it has a cognitive dimension for these late antique epistographers who likely understood erotic longing as galvanizing the passionate quest for wisdom, which deeply pervades Platonic texts. The Gazan sophists deployed erotic language to address lots of different interlocutors, ranging from students to fellow literati to lawyers at the provincial governor's court at Caesarea in Palestina Prima. This species of emotional register, used to achieve ingratiation and successful persuasion, denotes the spiritual love among literati conjoined in their love of learning. Although this speech conforms to Menander's recommendation to use erotic language in encomiastic oratory, it operates conversationally in the letters as expressions of intense emotion calculated to persuade, and is one feature of the sophists' construction of a charming epistolary persona. Particularly prominent in the letters of Procopius, erotic language in patronage letters sweetens requests for aid for clients from literati advocates. It sweetens requests for letters addressed to students, requests for literary productions, letters addressed to parents and students, and letters of friendship addressed to fellow sophists. Additionally, we have examples of Procopius using this language back at him. So Procopius's interlocutors use this language. Procopius's lawyer, admirer, Megethius, we'll talk about him in a second, employs erotic language to depict his zeal for Procopius's sophistic creations in letter 169. Eros seems to have also, the god himself, seems to have been a deity of special literary and local significance at Gaza. The theme of Eros as a cosmic organizing principle, reflected in myriad Greek texts, provides the basis of Procopius's description of the painting of Phaedra and Hippolytus at Gaza. Procopius's declamations all showcase this conception of Eros as they explore the mythology of Adonis and Aphrodite, traditionally commemorated at Gaza on the Day of the Roses. The view of Eros as pervasive in the animal and vegetal world, characteristic of the prescriptions of the genre of the Gamalios Logos, as expressed by Menander Rhetor, is also present in Procopius's recently discovered epithelium for Meles and Antonina. Omnipotent Eros is also the main topic of John of Gaza's Anacreontic poetry written to celebrate the Day of the Roses. John of Gaza is a grammarian who was roughly contemporary with Procopius. Although the Day of the Roses may no longer have been celebrated at Gaza by the 6th century, we can't discount the enduring literary and communal value of the myth of Aphrodite and Adonis at Gaza, a subject which reappears in the oratory, letters, and poetry of the literati of Gaza. We also find Procopius and his protege, Choricius, who took over Procopius's role as city sophist after Procopius's death or thereabouts. We find that they both use erotic language in encomiastic oratory. And I'm going to kind of glide over this a little bit because I don't want to get over time, but we find Choricius, for example, speaking of the love of different cities, the erotic desire different cities in the Greek East had for Procopius, trying to ply him away with job offers, trying to pry Procopius away from his home city of Gaza. We also have in the Christian polemic of Aeneas, the Theophrast, Theophrastus, Aeneas has a couple characters in the Theophrastus refer to students of philosophy as lovers. They refer to one another as lovers. So Gauss and Literati seem to favor casting intellectual friendships in erotic terms, and they conserve in their writing the aesthetic register of Platonic pedagogical language. So epistolary erotic speech in this context appears to function in the letters to express the view of Eros as a universal ordering principle that can move people to action, toward communication, a cosmic force, the cosmic force of Eros as a primordial force inducing persuasion and shaping interpersonal relationships. So applying the persuasive power of erotic speech, characteristic of encomiastic oratory, these letter authors depict erotic desire, the Cupids, and Eros himself as metaphorical forces that shape interpersonal relationships. So arguably, the erotic expressions in these letters embrace psychological elements, memory, imagination, and desire, and physiological phenomena, especially vision. So erotic speech offers a heuristic for thinking about how late antique literati express their emotional attachments and their perception of Eros as a motivating force in interpersonal discourse. So oaths to the erotes encase expressions of friendship's integral relationship to self-knowledge. In letter 56 to the lawyer John, which is not, I'm not yet to the handout, sorry. But in letter 56 to the lawyer John, Procopius defends himself against his friend's accusation of silence. And he swears that he remains a steadfast friend despite neglecting to write. He says, but O Zeus and Orotes, and whoever watches over friendship, persuade my accusers how never have I arrived at forgetfulness of you, but I am in presence of mind, and I seem, and if I seem to say something and hear others speaking, how if I ignore my accusers, I have also forgotten myself. In letters begging for replies, so now we're turning to the handout, erotic speech in letters begging for reply strikes to charm a recipient simply to write a letter in response, which letters in themselves have the capacity to heal Eros, according to Procopius in letter 132. The eloquence of former students, such as Pancratius, so here on the handout, the eloquence of former students stirs Procopius's longing. Quote, having tasted of your muse with the tip of my finger, as they say, I became frenzied like a Bacchic reveler toward her with utter desire. And it's no small thing to choose to leave her, even if it is necessary to be physically separated. As his student sails away to Alexandria to continue his studies, Procopius mentally projects himself as present with Pancratius, imagining that he too now dwells in Alexandria. That, he says, is the sort of thought the Cupids, erotes, have engendered within him. Elsewhere, Procopius writes to former students that the invincible power of Eros to manipulate natural phenomena will also induce his students to write back to him and bring him toward him, like the river god Alpheus mixing with his lover, the Sicilian sea nymph Arethusa. In letters of patronage, so now moving along, the language of desire in letters of patronage intensifies emotional intimacy and also suggests that the shared paideia of interlocutors entailed knowledge of same-sex erotic expressions. In letter 90 to the lawyer Sabinus on the handout, Procopius opens with a stock temporal metaphor drawn from Theocritus 12.2, a topos familiar from late antique epidactic oratory to measure his longing for his absent friend. He avers, if a single day suffices for lovers to make them old, you would not likely know already how much I have aged. And Procopius then reminisces about the moments he shared in Sabinus's presence. Long ago, I was blessed, seeing you and clinging to your qualities, and all things were benefits of you. Most pleasing was your face, your words charming the ear, your intelligence producing goodwill. And whenever I longed, Pothain, whenever I longed for beauty, it was sufficient just to look at you. Extended erotic disclosures preface an expression of expected assistance in letter 31 on the handout, addressed to the lawyer Diodorus in Caesarea Palaestina, the provincial capital. Indicating the pleasure that Diodorus's preceding letter granted, Procopius rhapsodizes in explicit sexual language about the experience of receiving the letter after a period of silence, saying, quote, "So do not write often, so that I, lacking sight of you, might delight in dreams. Since even a passionate lover, missing his darling, saw a beneficial dream and was satisfied," end quote. Such blatant erotic flattery should immediately arrest Diodorus's attention and elicit a favorable disposition toward Procopius and the letter bearer seeking an unspecified favor. Erotic speech also facilitated intellectual exchange by enunciating requests for literary and rhetorical productions. And so now I want to draw your attention actually to the letter on the second. It's kind of at the very bottom of my handout, Megethius, letter 169. So this is a letter that there are several letters that survive in some of the manuscripts that contain letters written by a younger lawyer, advocate, admirer of Procopius, addressed to Procopius, a man named Megethius. And this is, one of the few examples in the pre-Byzantine world of mutui, of letters that are both sides of an ongoing epistolary conversation. And Megethius beseeches Procopius to send a copy of a funeral oration that enthralled him and a group of his associates. So in letter 169, Megethius playfully teases Procopius by lampooning sophists as prattlers, laloi, whom no one can stop from their silly talking, fluarein. This is apparently the second letter that Megethius sent with his request, and Procopius still hasn't sent his speech over to Megethius. Megethius avows that the source of this lighthearted banter and his passion for Procopius's oratory is Eros himself. As he jokes, "Such things, Eros, son of Aphrodite, has compelled me to prattle to you. He who affects me greatly bids me to be a lover, Aristes, of your creations." So Megethius aims to elicit the speech from Procopius on the grounds that it will please Eros. And so he says, "Please, Procopius, write to the lovers of your speeches," so speaking about himself and a group of friends. Erotic expressions in these missives concatenate desire, speech, image, and memory. Letter logoi produce for lovers images of the beloved drawn from memory. So epistolary speech is connected to visibility. And we see this again, the same in letter 26 to Eusebius, the father of Procopius' student Megalus. Procopius opens with a variant of the proem in letter 90, whimpering, "If even one day makes those who are longing grow old, for such a long time you think me to have aged, thus struck by longing for you." Having been so long deprived of the sight of his beloved. So Eusebius's letters mitigate Procopius's longing. According to Procopius, Eusebius's letters rival the cleverness of physicians who, though they don't have cures, are still able to palliate pain. Eusebius's letters, even if they are, of course, second best to presence, Eusebius's letters diminish Procopius's pathos. his longing for his friend. Likening the after effect of letter logoi to the production of an image or likeness of his friend, Procopius again turns to erotic language to enunciate his affection, indicating, and this is on the handout, "Now I imitate the intents among lovers, and through an image, that is, through your letter, I assuage my passion for you." A second letter to former student Pancratius also articulates a perception of the interpenetrating relationship among desire, image, and logoi, rebuking his former student's silence in letter 152 on the handout. Procopius says, "Thus do you disregard those who are longing for you? Thus do you hold back the flowings of your tongue?" Desire itself furnishes Procopius's imagination with Pancratius's image. But to me, Procopius writes, "Desire delineates your image, and now I realize I was dreaming, though awake in body." So if Procopius can't have Pancratius present at Gaza, he pleads, at least in letters, "Give yourself to me, for to those who are longing it is a consolation to see a small symbol of those who are beloved." Reiterating his request, Procopius reminds Pancratius of promises made in his earlier letters. "Remember those words in which there were promises to come soon to me with frequent letters, or to make your absence imperceptible." Both the imaginative force of desire, a sort of cognitive power, and epistolary logoi are sufficient to rouse the surrogate image of one's beloved friends. Memory, turning to, on the handout, letter 68, so kind of the penultimate example there. Letter 68, Procopius indicates in a letter to the provincial governor of Palestina Prima named Thomas, memory is a continual font of pleasure for separated friends. Memory of good men knows how to delight, even without sight of them, and especially when they are no longer present, who have filled with complete love those who have experienced their lovers continually delivering pleasure through sight. The source of memory that grants sight, Procopius maintains, is desire itself. Lovers create for themselves images of those who are away and contrive a likeness of them as present. Suggesting that desire's imaginative work is second best to physical presence, Procopius closes with a prayer that fortune may contrive something new and bring together sometime those lovers who for so long have kept themselves away from one another. Now, turning briefly to Aeneas, and on the handout here, we also find glimmers of erotic speech and the Platonic depiction of the capability of speech to mold images in Aeneas letter 12, with which the sophist sends a self-portrait for an epistolary friend, Epiphanius the sophist. And so apparently Epiphanius has been asking Aeneas for his image. And Aeneas uses erotic language, noting how, quote, on the handout, to the other lovers, even the footprint of the lover is sufficient to create desire, and you are seeking images of both soul and body. Theorizing about the intersections between the language of letters and images, Aeneas writes that logoi, by which he means Epiphanius' letters, have the capacity to produce images of the individual soul, as he asserts words interpreting clearly without intention, trace, and outline the soul itself. Adopting the ancient perception that ekphrastic speech, in effect, painted material images and brought them to life in the mind of the hearer, Aeneas asserts a perception of the power of speech to materialize the immaterial soul. Aeneas has summoned an artist to paint his image, and once Epiphanius receives his friend's image set in colors, it will grant a sort of vicarious shared presence. And so Aeneas says, now you can talk with me and see me and have no less than being with me. As is well known, the perception that a person's logoi, or offered access to his soul and made present the absent interlocutor, parousia, had a long pedigree in Greco-Roman antiquity. Similarly, the conception of memory as visual in nature, the understanding that sense perception inscribed images on the mind or soul, and the idea that mental images as the residue of sense perception and the foundation of memory lay behind all speech were well represented in texts ranging from Aristotle to Augustine, as well as the rhetorical handbooks from the imperial and late antique periods. The attachment of language to mental representations thus accounts for the capacity for speech to arouse an audience's visual imagination and to induce in the listener or hearer the virtual experience of the perceptible. In this context, erotic desire intensifies the interdependence of memory, speech, and image. Now, I don't want to go super over time, and my perception of time is quite altered through travel and just the act of speaking for a long time. Embedded letters in Greek novels are an excellent kind of counterpoint or context for thinking about where kind of the Gazan authors may have drawn their ideas, but certainly we have kind of this mixture of kind of the power of speech to bring before one's eyes the soul, like that ability. And we also see different ideas about vision and the beloved's image as entering the lover's soul through the eyes. Achilles Tacitus is particularly concerned with the role of vision in impressing images on the lover's soul. And passages in Greek novels also refer specifically to the relationships between memory, images, and the lover's imagination. So I just want to kind of put that as an addendum to thinking about this language. And I'm just going to kind of try to go through quickly. In this brief overview, as we've seen, amatory language emerges as a performance of paideia. And it furnishes for letter authors a rich sensory vocabulary for social work, for forging and intensifying emotional intimacy and providing a virtual shared presence, parousia, with one's recipients. We've seen how erotic speech can provide a metaphor for expressing friendship, a means of articulating the worthiness of one's interlocutor, also a means to massage differences in the work of social networking, from a sophist speaking upward to a provincial governor, or maybe speaking downward to a student, not that any of us speak downward to our students, a vehicle for constructing solidarity among urban literati. So knowledge of these expressions of same-sex desire was a confirmation of paideia. So same-sex desire here as an expression of belonging among like-minded intellectuals can be conceptualized as a visible performance of late Roman aristocratic masculinity. But this is a context in which this is not easy. It remains an era in which Christian leaders and Christian literati experience complex ambivalence and unresolved tensions with the Hellenic intellectual heritage as a continuing source of aristocratic cultural authority and social legitimacy. And moreover, such expressions of same-sex male desire continues to flourish in a context of intensifying imperial legislation criminalizing same-sex relationships and sex acts, very evident in the late codes, in the Theodosian Code, and in the constitutions and other legal materials of Justinian. Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much. So this, what do we do with this paradox of this sort of language in the midst of increasing legislation criminalizing same-sex relationships among men? And one wonders, too, if the use of erotic language in these letters draws some sort of energy, some sort of cultural energy from the contemporary increasing criminalization of same-sex desire and the austere morality of monastic communities in the environs of Gaza. Long-standing relationships between the Sons of Gaza studying at Alexandria and the Egyptian monasteries at Eneton, the Gazan sophist friendships and correspondence with monks and clergy. All of this was never far from the epistolary social play of Aeneas and Procopius. And we also have, I know I'm getting going on here, but we have a number of passages in the very same authors the very same epistographers of kind of pushback on classicizing speech and even erotic speech. So that also becomes an additional paradox in this context. And so I don't want to, I'm not going to go through all of those. But although there are a lot of uncertainties concerning the vicissitudes of the preservation of the epistolary of Aeneas and Procopius, their letters were presumably were collated into letter books after their deaths. And they constituted, to borrow the eloquence of Jennifer Eveler, sophisticated textual performances of authority in absentia. So the collection itself was a character signature of the sophist, an ethopoeia, perpetuating the public memory of the sophist, but also his network and the tastes of his network. So these texts, these letters, originally written to appeal to the aesthetic and intellectual ideologies of urban literati correspondence, transmitted ambivalent aesthetic and intellectual ideologies of late Roman networks to a trans-historical community of Hellenes. In this way, same-sex erotic epistolary speech testified to the dynamics of a living philia among late antique leaders of the Greek East, who themselves engaged in a time-collapsing antiquarian dialogue with the classical Greek past and provided a sandbox for rhetorical play and modes of intimacy for future Byzantine Romaioi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So we revert to the normal pattern, and that will be discussed in the round table at the end. So it's a coffee break now. Yeah, coffee break now.
Yes, coffee break, but shorter than...
Yes. What time do we?
Approximately 20 minutes.
20 minutes. No, it's fine. I mean, you weren't that much. You were.
I was confused because
Yeah.
we started
About 5 minutes over. But...
Oh, okay, that's not that bad.
Would you mind taking a glass, please? So, good afternoon again. Let us now resume with the final session of this first day of conference, which I am particularly pleased to be chairing. Before introducing the two speakers of this session, allow me to briefly remind that the scheduled duration of each talk is 30 minutes, and that any question or curiosity the audience might have about the speaker's forthcoming papers will be addressed during the final roundtable chaired by Professor Gahese Hudo. I am now happy to introduce our first speaker, Enrico Simonetti. Enrico obtained both his BA and MA at the University of Bari, defending thesis on the so-called Crotonian section of Petronius Satyricon. In 2024, he was awarded a doctoral degree in classics at the University of Bari, with a dissertation focused on Ovid's Herois 14th, Hypermestra Telemachus, which he published shortly after as an independent monograph containing introduction, text, translation, and commentary. He is currently a tenure-track researcher in Latin language and literature at Pegaso University. His research interests focus primarily on Ovid and Augustan poetry, Petronius and ancient novel, as well as the reception of classical texts in both medieval and modern eras. The title of his paper today is Writing and Reading Letters in Ancient Novel, Intersection of Literary Genre. And it is my great pleasure to give him the floor.
Buon pomeriggio, il mio intervento sarà in inglese, però voglio ringraziare Pietro per la gentile presentazione e gli organizzatori per avermi coinvolto in questa conferenza. In a famous couplet from the Ars Amatoria, Ovid attributes to himself the credit of having created or innovated the literary genre of the love letter, previously unknown to other authors. Vel tibi composita cantetur epistula voce, igno tocca liis ille novavit opus. Drawing on Propertius' elegy for free, in which Arethusa writes to her husband Lycotas, in the first series of the Heroides, famous heroines express their amorous sufferings and the nostalgia for the interrupted union with their weary, slow to redeem their lovers from danger or captivity, or indifferent to their pathemata. The three double letters added to the original corpus transcend the firm anchoring of the epistles in the present and the dominance of the female perspective. However, the presence of erotic letters is not confined to the collections. In Plautus Pseudolus, for instance, the first Latin example of a love letter is found, sent by Phoenicium to his beloved Calidorus and read by the slave Pseudolus. Moreover, in Book 9 of the Metamorphoses, Ovid himself introduces a miniature heroine in which Bublis confesses to her brother Caunus her incestuous passion for him. It is precisely the form's flexibility that allows the epistolary mode to adapt to the novel, which tends to broadly reshape topoi, themes, and languages from other literary genres. Furthermore, the assimilation of individual letters or love correspondence within the narration is facilitated by the centrality of erotic themes in surviving Greek and Latin novels. Whereas Ovidian heroines often deform the mythological plot, in the novels, love letters, no longer isolated from their context, appear integrated into the development of events and respond to the contingent needs of the characters. An intriguing example of novelistic correspondence is represented by the epistolia that characterize a segment of the troubled love story between Kirke and Polyuainos in the Satyrica. The analysis of the protagonist's reply to the woman's sarcastic note aims, on the one hand, to highlight the marked allusiveness of the epistolary dialogue, founded upon the conciliation of lexicon and imagery drawn from different langues, and, on the other hand, to point out both similarities and divergences between the Petronian correspondence and the love letters found in Greek novels. Indeed, even within the letters themselves, the Satyrica assimilates the so-called popular narrative and parodically subverts the idealized claims of his chaste characters. From the very introduction of the degraded society of Croton, infested by the Eredipetae, the reader of the Satyrica is primed for the subversion of common norms of civil life. To exploit the naivety and obsession of the Crotonians, on the advice of the elderly poetaster Eumolpus, the group decides to stage a mimus. Encolpius, Giton, and the Mercenarius Corax will pose as slaves of a wealthy African magnate who, impersonated by the Senex, will succeed in extracting generous gifts from the captatores by boasting of riches and political influence. However, in the surviving fragments, the developments of this mendacium are almost entirely neglected. Instead, the Crotonian section is devoted to the ill-fated liaison between Encolpius, renamed Polyuainos, and a lady named Kirke. The affair begins under auspicious conditions because, thanks to the effective mediation of Crusis, Kirke's handmaid, the young man, despite initial reluctance, agrees to meet the admirer, whose statuesque beauty provokes in him a state of ecstatic bewilderment. However, once preliminaries are exhausted, Polyuainos is unable to prove his virility and triggers Kirke's irritated reaction. Regarding the account of the protagonist's painful erotic lethargy, scholarship has rightly noted the influence of Horace's two Iambi, 8 and 12, dedicated to impotence before decrepit women, and Ovid's elegy 3:7 from the Amores, in which the poet laments his failure in the erotic pugna with an extraordinary and long-desired woman. Wounded in her pride as an excellent lover, Kirke attempts to establish a different form of contact with the Polyaenos. Whereas for the Magister Amoris, the latter must probe the ground in view of an approach, the matron's note constitutes not a rogatio, but, in the manner of an Ovidian heroid, a means to express resentment and to shift the blame for failure onto her partner. The mediation offered by writing, in fact, allows Kirke to avoid direct confrontation with the enemy, with whom she still hopes to renew relations, and to disguise her sexual frustration beneath refined periphrases. As the promoter of the liaison from the very beginning, Cusis delivers to Polyaenos the mistress' note. Here begins the text of the handout. The laconic hypothetical clause following the salutatio, si libidinosa essem quererer decepta, renders the statement a masterpiece of irreverent irony that must be interpreted in the light of the context. Indeed, not only Kirke is famous in Croton for her libido, but the hypothesis, presented as unreal, is precisely realized throughout the letter, which aims to reproach the inuria perpetrated by the impotent youth. The sender verbally claims not to wish to complain about erotic disappointment, but in fact, she recontextualizes two thematic verbs from the Heroides, queri and decipere. Often, as in the stories of Fulis, Eupsipule, Dido, and Ariadne, the heroine's disappointment is made more poignant by sexual violation. Polyaenos, for his part, has indeed deceived Kirke, but his deceit is by no means comparable to the perfidy reproached to the mythic heroes. The same ambiguity emerges in the term inuria, which in erotic lexicon can also denote sexual violence. The woman experiences Polyaenos' erotic failure as a personal affront, potentially even subject to legal complaint, and fears that her fama may be sullied by the young man's shortcomings. Alongside the querulous attitude typical of the offended heroine, the woman subverts another typically Ovidian role, that of the doctor specialized in matters of love. In the comedic farcical context, however, the disorder does not manifest in the intimate torments of the lover. Moreover, Kirke, rather than seeking to heal, is concerned with stigmatizing the impedimenta and emphasizing the gravity of the periculum of the patients. Her exposition is structured like a specialist report. Following the diagnosis, in which the woman analyzes the symptoms and establishes the nature of the illness, paralius in cave, come first the prognosis, then the therapy. If Polyaenos is already dead in the middle part of the body, medius, the blame is attributed to Giton, whose embraces the Erastes would do well to avoid for 3 days. Meanwhile, Kirke's handmaid ensures that the young man reads the entire convicium and promptly replies to the malicious insinuations contained in the note. Serving a similar dramatic function, In the correspondence between Leucippe and Clitophon, the slave Satyrus not only acts as intermediary, but also urges his hesitant master to respond to his beloved's letter. Just as Nape, the Ancilla Conciliatrix, in the unsuccessful exchange of tabellae between Ovid and Corinna, narrated in Amores 1:11-12, Croesus likewise represents the sole driving force of the relationship, at least until the second failure, from which she too will suffer, Crusis Vapulat. Indeed, Kirke shares with her interlocutor not only erudition, but also a complete inability to act, which emerges both in her handmaid's activism and in her own assimilation to a statue, and in the inability to provoke any reaction in her erotic prey. After counseling the disheartened youth, Croesus warns him against further provoking the mistress, who is no longer apud se after the offense suffered. Instead, he must seek to regain a favor with a very mild response and win back her wounded heart through candid humanitas. Synonymous with benevola, the adjective candida most likely qualifies the sincerity of the content and the kindness of the tone. The singularity of the humanitas advised by an Ancilla to a servus, even if feigned, is further emphasized by the fact that in Saturica, slaves typically benefit from the humanitas of socially superior individuals. Indeed, Trimalchio decrees that et servi homines sunt. Commentators note that even in one of the Epistulae ad Lucilium, where Seneca reports a thought of Panaetius, humanitas, understood as benevolence, constitutes a quality capable of eliciting love. Sive enim nos respicit, humanitate eius irritamur, sive contempsit, superbia accendimur. It may be added that according to Panaetius, even in love, this virtue stands in opposition to superbia, which Croesus reproaches Polyuinus for during the embassy, superbiam captas, exhorting him to behave humanius. The handmaid words manage to dispel the young man's hesitation, who immediately seems to assume responsibility for his faults. Fate or me domina saepe peccasse, nam et homo sum et aduc juvenis. Interested in avoiding further conflict, he endorses the version of events offered by the domina, and with a Terentian echo attributes the numerous sins committed in the past not only to the inherent limits of his humanitas, wisely drawing on the advice of his Stoic counselor, but also to youth, which in the Saturica is closely linked to inexperience and propensity for error. Using the forensic lexicon previously employed by Kirke, Polyuinus then downplays tamen the apologetic nuance of his first statement and declares that before his erotic failure with the splendid Kirke, he had never committed crimes punishable by death. Numquam tamen ante hunc diem usque ad mortem deliqui, abes confitentem reum, quicquid iusseris merui. After the verbs peccare and delinquere, the phrase confitentem reum completes Polyuinus' transformation into an accused party, worthy, by his own admission, of suffering any punishment the injured party decides upon. The evocation of past misadventures link Polyuinus' letter to those of Chaereas, who endured slavery and crucifixion for the violence inflicted on Calliroe, and of Leucippe, who despite a long series of sufferings, saw her beloved marry her new mistress Melite. While in her reply Cleitophon boasts of having preserved his chastity, for Polyaenos, sexual failure is equated with the most heinous crimes. Indeed, the Tricolon Proditionem Feci, Hominem Occidi, Templum Violavi, sketches Polyaenos' criminal profile, who in his affected frankness perhaps intends to excite Kirke's erotic imagination. To satisfy her craving, the matron prefers not only the dregs of society, but also those who, through their crimes, have earned the dreadful punishment of the cross. Although some critics consider the three offenses a mere recollection of events narrated in lost sections of the novel, most interpreters see in them a metaphorical exaggeratio of failure, consistent with Polyaenos' emphatic style, especially since Kirke herself is called upon to impose an appropriate supplicium, in haec facinora quaere supplicium. However, since references to the protagonist's extra-legal life emerge repeatedly in the novel, it cannot be excluded that this triple confession transfigures actual criminal acts committed, presenting them as ironic amplifications of the sexual crime. Just as Abrocomes offers himself to the torments inflicted by his suitor Manto to affirm his unwavering fidelity to Antia, the confessed culprit also declares his willingness to endure torture or death at the hands of his domina, in order to reaffirm his guilt, sive occidere placet cum ferro meo venio, sive verberibus contenta es, curro nudus ad dominam. This dual alternative, with its evident comic undertones, evokes the topos of servitium amoris, and is framed within the elegiac register of both the episode and the correspondence. Though beset by sarcastic barbs, Polyaenos perceives that Kirke's desire remains far from extinguished, and through clues learns of the matron's vulnerabilities, including the habit, shared by other ladies of Croton, of kissing the flagellorum vestigia. As in the tricolon cited earlier, the subsequent comparison appears skillfully calibrated to stimulate the recipient's desire, although, as usual, the situation will spiral out of control for the protagonist, who, after repeated erotic failures, will indeed be forced to endure Kirke's verbera. Having admitted his fault, Polyaenos offers a tentative self-defense and requests a second reparative meeting. After drawing the reader's attention with the solemn formula illud unum memento, which lends gravity to the following declaration, he partially revises his initial confession, mesa epe peccasse, by attributing the responsibility for his disappointing performance to his defective instrument, as if independent from the rest of his body. Non me, sed instrumenta peccasse. Through this marked dissociation between himself and his inefficient pars corporis, the writer seeks to justify his dysfunction. A euphemism for the membrum virile, the noun instrumenta may allude to the apparatus of the mendacium, since in the Satyrica it is used only by Eumolpus, who laments the absence of a more splendid scenic apparatus, instrumentum lautius, for his machination of deceit. Eager to match the doctrina of his interlocutor, as a corollary to his psychological split, Polyuinos likens himself to a soldier who, unarmed at the moment of battle, is unable to fight, paratus miles arma non abui. The simile, clearly derived from elegiac and Ovidian traditions, highlights the martial meaning of instrumentum, while the arma, intended in an obscene sense, evoke the useless equipment of the miles amoris. Lost and bewildered, Polyuinos himself does not know who is responsible for such a horrendous disruption, quis hoc turbaverit nescio, and formulates two hypotheses concerning the causes of his impotence, both introduced by Forsitan. Although incapable of pinpointing the reasons for his failure, non invenio quod feci, in keeping with the correspondence tendency to employ euphemism, the writer dematerializes the concreteness of the images and first postulates an anticipatory emotional activation of libido, sublimated by the term animus, preceding the delayed bodily response, forsitan animus antecessit corporis moram, then a premature exhaustion of pleasure at the peak moment of excitement, forsitan dum omnia concupisco, voluptatem tempore consumpsi. The subtle scholarly context, however, extends also to medical knowledge. While Kirke caustically diagnoses paralysis in the young man and warns him of the danger of the frigus spreading from the middle part of the body to the knees and hands, the despondent Polyuinos distances himself from these solicitous warnings, paralius in tamen cavere iubes, and considers impossible the worsening of the paralysis that has deprived him of the instrumenta necessary to possess no one other than a woman like her, tamquam ea maior fieri possit, quae abstulit mi per quod etiam te abere potui. In the brief prelude to the closing formula of the epistolium, summa tamen excusationis meae haec est, just before the lacuna marked by the witnesses L, the defendant betrays impatience to repair the wrongdoing. In the epilogue, placebo tibi, si me culpam emendare per miseris, besides the distinctly erotic intonation of the pairing between placere and the dative, it should be noted that the verb emendare, belonging to the juridical lexicon, by virtue of its use in arte medicinali, is congruent with the medical lexicon as well. As evidence of the fusion between juridical and erotic language, finally, culpa looks back to the opening peccare, with which it shares an elegiac tradition, and indicates the guilt that provoked Priapus wrought in the poem dedicated to the god, whose connection to the rescript have been analyzed in detail by Aldo Setaioli in his study of the short poems of Petronius. In summary, the inclusion of erotic letters within the Crotonian episode not only confirms the influence of Ovid, master of love and founder of the elegiac epistolary tradition, on the narration of the liaison, but also reconnects the scene of frustrated seduction to the parody of the romance and adventure novel. Tormented by the failure of their tête-à-tête, Kirke and Polyuinos invert in their letter the steadfast commitment to chastity characteristic of their Greek counterparts. Reflecting the compositional mechanism of the narrative, the epistolia revisit well-known elegiac topoi, and comedic motives consistent with the farcical framework, integrating them into a lexical blend indebted to forensic and medical jargon. Far from serving merely as a device for variatio or to bridge geographic distance, and following many Ovidian letters and novelistic correspondences, these letters aim at the reconstruction of a relationship in crisis. Although overtly apologetic in tone, Polywaino's reply does not forgo competing with Kirke's missive in terms of doctrina and ironic ambiguity. It reprises the learned metaphors and specialized vocabulary of the first letter, and in response to the matron's stinging provocations, seeks to exploit her weaknesses to awaken a desire far from extinguished, and to obtain a chance for redemption. As further testimony to the protagonist's ineffectiveness, the Codicilli bring the lovers closer, yet simultaneously heighten Kirke's expectations, destined once again to be disappointed. The correspondence, surrogate of direct conversation, thus expresses the protagonist's pretentious mythomania and manifests the impotence that unites them. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Enrico, for these penetrating insights on the novelistic afterlife of these elegiac and epistolary motives which Petronius drastically, and we might say comically, overturns in the Cretonian section of his Satyricon, therefore giving birth to the exquisite literary pastiche that you have so effectively analyzed. Thank you so much. Now, as I recalled earlier, any potential question on Enrico's talk will be reserved to the final roundtable of this session. And therefore, I am now glad to introduce the final speaker of this session, that is Efrosini Tsakou. Efrosini is a talented young scholar specializing in the depiction of Greek hetairae and on the broader concepts of female sexuality in antiquity. She is currently a visiting member at the UMR Almas Research Center at the University of Lille, where she also obtained a teaching fellowship. In June 2024, she completed a doctoral program on the portrayal of hetairae in the works of Alciphron, Philostratus, and Aristóteles, earning also the European label distinction, which is a very prestigious title, I assume. Her first monograph, Courtisane et lettres d'amour grecques, is due to be published in January 2026 in the prestigious Armand Collin's editorial series. And the title of the paper today is Exploring Love Letters in Byzantine Erotic Novels. The floor is yours, Efrosini.
Excellent. Can you hear me? Excellent. So, hello again. Thank you so much for the incredible opportunity to be here today with you. I would like to present you today a work in progress on the Byzantine Romance Livistros and Rodamni. And just to note, it's only been 30 years that we have a critical edition of the text. What makes this text especially fascinating, and what I wish to emphasize here, is extended epistolary episode comprising near a quarter of the romance. Those letters are more than decorative insertions. They represent a deliberate use of rhetorical exercise, tropes and schemata inherited from the ancient and Byzantine epistolary educational tradition. And in order to proceed, it is necessary to discuss the structural analysis of the epistolary episode of the Romans in order to explain the narrative significance of this letters exchange, and then proceed with the presentation of some specific example of the love letters. So, Livistros and Rhodamni is an anonymous love romance composed in 4,601 verses, making the longest and most artfully written of the surviving Byzantine vernacular romances. Written around the mid or late 13th century, still its date of composition remains problematic. Likely in the imperial court of Nicaea during the reign of John III Batatzis and his son Theodore II Laskaris, its author, according to many modern scholars, was steeped in both Greek erotic literary traditions and he was familiar with medieval French. For example, there are some scholars that they have identified similarities with the 13th century French Roman, Le Roman de la Roche. The story reminds, of course, the prose fiction of the post-classical literature. We have the young hero and heroine meet, fall in love, are separated by accident, are united, and finally get married. Of course, its story is narrated in the first person with layered storytelling. The intricacy of the narrative within a narrative structure facilitates a wide array of inventive narrative modalities. We can say that Livistros and Rhodamni has almost everything. We found dream sequences, dream interpretations, philosophical discourses on love, letters, songs, occult incantations, and of course ekphrases or marvels of art and architecture. Now, from the 4,601 verses of Livistros and Rhodamni, about 1,000 of them consist the epistolary part of the Romans. And thus, a very big specialist on these Romans, Panagiotis Agapitos, calls it more correctly, we're talking about a scene of the exchange of letters and songs. In this embedded epistolary episode, the two protagonists, Livistros and Rhodamni, come to know each other, confess their love, quarrel, exchange tokens of love, and finally meet through an extended series of 23 letters integral to the plot. On the macro level, the exchange of letters between Livistros and Rhodamni serves as a medium for expressing their emotions, desires, and inner thoughts. This is particularly important because in this case examined, the direct communication is limited by social and physical barriers. Here to a very bad AI-generated photo, you can see that we have Rhodamni that throws down her letters from her balcony, and Livistros, who is outside of the castles and throws his letters with arrows onto the balcony of Rhodamni. And of course, Livistros is a foreign single lord, and Rhodamni is a princess enclosed in the castle. So both physical and social barriers. On the micro level of narrative structure, one of the advantages of included letters in fiction, or what will develop into the epistolary novel, is that the context is assured, The relationships are spelled out, the instrumentality of a letter or its failure to turn the plot as desired is clear to the reader. However, before analyzing this particularly interesting episode, there is seen that foreshadows both the romantic epistolary character of the rest of the story and prepares the reader or the listener, I'm going to explain that, for the embedded epistolary episode. So at the beginning of his story, Levi-Strauss tells to his friend Clitovon about two dreams he saw. In the first of these dreams, the young king is brought to the palace of three-faced Eros, Eros Trimorphoprósopos, who is the powerful ruler of the dreaded Empire of Love, a word that I very much appreciated, erotokratia. Having arrived at the entrance of a walled country yard, Levi-Strauss sees the guardian of the gate holding a draw sword in his one hand and an unfolded sheet of paper, χαρτίν απλωμένων, in his other. Of course, that can remind us the scrolls held by prophets, saints, and patrons in monumental art or in illuminated manuscripts, for example. And Levi-Strauss continues his story as follows. I'm going to read the translation. And further below from that writing it was written, the handsome guardian of the country yard and the gate of love. He who watched the gate told me, read this. I read the letters and was deeply saddened. So I say, from here on, I shall enslave myself to the bow of Eros. This particular passage conveys many messages to the reader or listener of this text. The inscription first informs about what has been seen and then forces the reader to accept its message. At this point, there is a strong correlation between logos and graphe. As you can see, you have, I don't know if you can see the arrow, yeah, okay? You have legei, anagnoseta, and on the other part you have graphi, grammata, which supports the hypothesis that this text has not only literary but also performative value. And as we see later, very consistent use of implied orality. Also, the author plays joyfully, of course, with the ambiguity of the word grammata, not only as letters of the alphabet, as inscription, but also as love letters, as the main medium that will be used to develop the romantic flame between the two protagonists. But also the reference to the bow of Eros foreshows the way that Levi-Strauss will try to erotically enslave Rhodamne by throwing his letters with arrows onto her balcony. Now, regarding the notion of letter in the epistolary episode of Levi-Strauss' Rhodamne, the letters are multi-faced objects that can be separated by their functionality, materiality, and by their emotional impact. The most frequented word is pitakin or pitakia in plural, which is a love letter in the form of a dependent poem and or song. And this is an innovation of the literary novels of the Comnenian period, so 12th century. We also have graphi and graphai to express letter and content, and of course grammata as letter and as written characters, and depends the context. Regarding their functionality as reply letters, we found words such as adipitakon, adigραφή, and adigramma. In addition, there are specific words that express the emotional impact of some letters. One of my favorites is the γραφή ερωτικογραμμένη or ερωτοπιτάκιν, and on the other hand, you have πονοχάρτιν as the sorrowful letter, the letter of rejection. The presence of these contrasting words, so you have πιτάκιν και αντιπίτακον, ερωτοπιτάκιον και πονοχάρτιν, indicates a rich rhetorical play with epistolary terminology. For one more time, this vocabulary mirrors the literary importance of letters in these narrative words. They are not incidental prompts, but central narrative devices around which action and emotions revolve. Also, all technicalities and ceremonial motions of formal letter writing, as we know it from Byzantine epistolography, are observed. Letters are written by the very hand of the sender. They are sealed, sent, received, unsealed, unfolded, read, and commented upon. For example, here we have the moment just after the third letter of Livistros, the servant of Rhodamni, Vetanos, finds Livistros' letter on Rhodamni's balcony. And they say, "Did you see, Lady Rhodamni, sovereign of the Graces, a paper I found lying on our balcony? What is written on it? I do not know. Here, take and read it. Expound to me what it says and about whom it speaks." She reaches out, takes the paper, unties its fastening, unrolls it, looks at it, and reads what is written on it. However, none of these poetic love letters contains salutatory or closing formulas. The narrative technique of the unknown author of Livistros and Rhodamni proves to be truly elaborate, especially in the Bennett epistolary episode. I may suggest that some parts of the Roman were planned with geometrical precision, and I'm going to explain why. Right away, I would like to propose a schematization in order to decode this very complex narrative structure of these 23 letters. So, as Panagiotis Agapitos has proposed, we are dealing with the scene of the exchange of letters and songs, and more specifically, we're talking about 23 letters, from which 21 are purely erotic, following by 4 songs, καταλόγια. For this reason, I will call them epistolary cycles, each ending with a song. The songs do not advance the plot, at least not directly, but summarize the content of the preceded letters. Yeah. Don't know if you have time to say it all. For example, the first cycle, we have a series of 4 letters of Livistros, try to, persuade Rhodamni, following by song 1. After cycle B, it starts with Vetanos, urgings. No way. I'm in the middle.
We could arrange for 15.
Make it 15. We're passing to circle C because we don't have time. It starts with a delightful episode by the very much suffering Livy-Strauss, who is addressing to the moon, following by a short letter of anger by Rodamni. Letter 13, Livy-Strauss wonders why her letter revealed him death opposite to the nature of love letters. Letter 14, Rodamni sends luckily a comforting letter. 15, Livy-Strauss regains confidence and asks again for a token of love. There we found he sent also a ring. Letter 16, we have the most exquisite love letter accompanied by a ring, a letter of Rodamni. Then Livy-Strauss regains confidence and asks Rodamni to meet him. And circle D, Rodamni writes an ugly letter and asks Livy-Strauss to end their relationship. Then we have 3 letters where Livy-Strauss actually threats Rodamni that he will kill himself, just to relax in the letter 22, where Rodamni confirms her feeling and agrees to meet him. Now, I very much enjoyed that episode because I have, how we say in English, a compulsion for closure. Yes, and I think that the author of this romance had the same thing. If you observe here, I think here it's more clear, every cycle contains 4 letters of Livy-Strauss. And no matter who opens the circle, it's always Livy-Strauss that ends the epistolary circle. Also, after a careful review of Livy-Strauss letters, I observed what we could say a rhetorical crescendo. The first, if you will compare the first letter and the last letter of Livy-Strauss in every cycle, we could see that there is a rhetorical improvement in his writing. Also, the exchange of letters between Rodamni and Livy-Strauss can be seen as a miniature rhetorical contest. On the one hand, we have Livy-Strauss amplifies passion through hyperboles, and on the other hand, we have Rodamni counters with gnomic wisdom and moral restraint. This agonistic structure reflects the pedagogical core of epistolary exercises to practice persuasion and rebound. For example, here I'm going very quickly. We have the letter 11 by the much suffering Livy-Strauss to Rodamni, following by the letter 12, a sorrowful letter of anger by Rodamni to Livy-Strauss. In the first letter, we read, "O my moon, you know too well the ills that I have suffered. It has not escaped your notice how much desire has signed me. At dawn, as the pains of desire did not let me sleep, I swiftly arouse and start watching you, O moon." Blah, 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 blah. Present her with terrible oaths, beseech her and send her a token together with your next letter. May I see the token and be given some respite, the desire in my soul so as not to die from this pain. These were my complaints about you to the moon, that it might find you and tell you about what grieves me. And it follows by letter 12 of Rodamni. It is not enough that I send you one letter and in my own handwriting, and that from now on you have bent an unbended mind towards desire, that you are in such a hurry to hold the token of mine, and that your hands should receive a pledge of my love. And there is a very strong phrase, "Τούτο μοιαζέει απαϊδεύτον καημανικών εισπόθων, the result of your vile hustle that convinced you to write to me is that you should not see another letter of mine as long as you are pressing me to give you a token through you be dying for a letter, you will not see one. So, on the one hand, we have the writer Livistros present himself as a suffering lover in the traditional postures, of course, of elegiac amateur. For example, that reminds us of Propertius, like Propertius' Cynthia, here Rhodamne becomes a focus of literary as well as erotic unease. Livistros cannot sleep and rise and down to address the moon that function almost like a mediator between Livistros and Rhodamne. And on the other hand, Rhodamne's letter follows a clear, deliberative logic. This phrase, τούτο ομοιάζει απαΐδευτον καημανικών, can be interpreted as a literary criticism of the rhetoric of love used by Livistros. Following epistolary styles of Pseudolibanius, which were most of manuscripts are dated back to the late 13th century and reflected the use of the handbook during the late Byzantine period, then we could say that letter 11 could be a paraklitike epistole that exemplifies exactly the rhetorical strategy of emotion amplification. And of course, it leans on some very typical topoi that we found in epistolary tradition, such as, and not only, such as sleepiness, death, and cosmic witnesses. While, on the other hand, letter 12 can be characterized as an epitimitike or meptike epistole that adopts a corrective rhetoric with clear and rational syllogism. To conclude, as you could see, the epistolary episode does not serve as opposed to the narrative action shifting from adventure to introspection, but actually promotes the action and its central love affair. The progression from romantic conquest to conflicts and then to reconciliation reflects the course of the lovers' romantic relationship. Furthermore, Livistros Rhodamne can be served as a case study for Byzantine reception of earlier epistolary traditions. The fictional correspondence demonstrates how a Byzantine romance could act as a performative extension of the epistolary tradition. This romance sets in motion a complex interplay between the rhetorical paideia of the author and the reader, and of course the erotic development of the main characters. Especially the epistolary episode can be interpreted as a rhetoric agon of love conquest. From one side we have the passionate Livistros try to persuade Rhodamne to give in to his romantic desires, while Rhodamne tries to show moral restraint. The unknown author of the romance follows the conventions of rhetoric by creating epistolary discourse where we found a dramatized contest between pathos and logos, a familiar topos in both ancient and Byzantine rhetorical culture. Since the epistolary genre have been used by and large in the Byzantine novel only in a sporadic and conventional way, here in Livistros Rhodamne, the genre has found one of its most authentic and powerful expressions. Grazie mille.
We are most grateful to Efrosini Tsaku for shedding light on the prominent narrative role of epistolary fiction in shaping character dynamics, plot progression, and thematic exploration in the tale of Lévi-Strauss and Redamni, which, as I assume, cleverly combines elements belonging to the previous glorious literary tradition in a new and innovative compositional structure.
Exactly.
So thank you. Now, I believe we have reached the conclusion. The schedule has been rigorously respected, which I'm very proud of. I'm pleased to invite Rafael Gallese Hudo to take the chairing seat for the final roundtable of this session, in which any questions you might have on the speakers' papers also this morning can now be addressed. Thank you so much.
Yes, I think we can make two sessions. I am invited to Anna, Antonios, Julia, Onofrio, and Sadira. Bien. Como ha pasado tanto tiempo desde esta mañana, me voy a tomar la libertà. Onofrio, ma tu è il special guest. Me voy a tomar la libertad de refrescaros la memoria de lo que escuchamos esta mañana y ya enlazamos con la sesión de tarde. En primer lugar intervino nuestra querida Ana Vicente, que nos estuvo hablando de la influencia de la retórica que la influencia de la retórica en la epístola ficticia es... I speak slowly, sorry. La influencia de la retórica en la epístola ficticia es mucho más compleja que esa simplificación que se ha hecho de una reducción a meros ejercicios de retórica, mejor o peor redactados. El profundo conocimiento de los tratados de retórica que estos autores tenían, pero sobre todo de la tradición literaria, hacen que este tipo de epístolas estén muy lejos de ser un producto de consumo fácil y asequible. Esta senda de estudio de la epístola que abriera en su día el profesor Arnold Zanetto, que luego continuara nuestra querida colega Ana Tiziana Drago con la obra de Aristénito o con la obra de Liano, en fin. Ana nos ha hecho una visión sinóptica de ese tipo de ejercicio con las cartas de Teofilacto. En el caso de Antonios Pandoropoulos, en esa línea de estudio de la voz femenina en las cartas ficticias, una línea en la que está obteniendo magníficos frutos editoriales, nos enseña que el rol de la mujer, el papel de la mujer en este tipo de literatura que normalmente se había pensado que era una especie de herencia del papel de la mujer en la comedia. Non stato io, promesso. Non so che cosa sia.
Was probably one of the microphones, or
Boh. Posso? Sì. El papel de la mujer en la epistolografía se demuestra que es bastante más complejo. Pero quizá uno de los aspectos más interesantes sea esa ventriloquización de la mujer, es decir, son personajes femeninos que hablan escritos por hombres. Entonces, eso es un aspecto bastante interesante. Giulia Marulla, a través de ejemplos selectos de Plinio, de Sidonio, de Símaco o de Jerónimo, ha tocado esta mañana un tema especialmente complejo, que es el de los límites, de las fronteras del género epistolar, que es una carta de amor. Cosa es una epístola erótica? El profesor Onofrio Vox ha profundizado precisamente en este mismo tema de los límites de la carta erótica, concluyendo con su particular saggezza, que una erotique epistolé no tiene que ser una carta de amor, puede ser también una carta sobre el amor. Ha sido un extraordinario elenco de pasajes sobre la mención de la carta erótica como tal en las fuentes grecolatinas, comenzando en el pasaje de Ateneo, en el que Clearco asegura que el tratado sobre el amor de Asopodoro y todo el género de la carta erótica, porque Ateneo dice genos, el género de la carta erótica es erotique poiesis dia logo, poesía erótica en prosa. Bien, pero quizá el detalle más interesante que el profesor Onofrio Vox nos ha puesto esta mañana sobre los kermos es que siempre habíamos pensado que la primera carta eran aquellos semataligrá de la Ilíada, y resulta que no, que Zenobio, el paremiógrafo Zenobio, nos ha descubierto que antes que esos semataligrá estaban ta Belerofontis grammata, las cartas de amor de Belerofonte, aquellas que le escribía a la reina Tosa. Y por último, Savira Hadiarevic nos ha hablado de gossip, no sé cuál es la palabra en italiano, en español es cotilleo. Pues, y misoginia, pero sobre todo ha dado detalles, más allá de por supuesto, hacernos un repaso exhaustivo sobre los diferentes tipos de cotilleos, de gossip en la epístola ficticia, pero sobre todo ha deslizado, o por lo menos a mí me ha parecido de lo más interesante, precisamente cuando el remitente de una epístola, de forma eufemística, practica la interdicción lingüística, es decir, silencia un comentario, una situación, un comportamiento que podría ser reprobable, que podría ser motivo de crítica. Ese tono misógino que efectivamente tiene la carta ficticia erótica, y que por supuesto hay que encuadrar en las corrientes cínicas que buscaban el descrédito de la mujer, pero realmente lo que pone de manifiesto es el papel activo de la mujer, ¿no? Efectivamente, es misoginia, pero podría encuadrarse en la máxima del Oderin dummetuant, es decir, que nos critiquen, que nos ataquen, pero porque la mujer es sexualmente activa en la epístola ficticia. Bueno, creo que eso es de lo que hemos hablado esta mañana. Ora, tora, ine y ora. Ahora es el momento, si queréis, de todas aquellas dudas que hayan podido surgir de la primera sesión de este día tan intenso. Si tenéis alguna pregunta, alguna cosa que queráis plantear, están a vuestra disposición nuestros colegas. Anche entre vosotros. No, siamo stanchi. Bueno, pues si no hay ninguna duda, no sé si las tres últimas, aparte de la de Patricia Rosenmeyer, no sé si alguna de las tres últimas de este segundo turno del día hay alguna cosa que queráis comentar. Elizabeth Connor nos ha hablado de diferentes tópicos, el de la parusía, la presencia, la carta como eikon tepsiges, como espejo del alma, la componente filofronética que preside todo intercambio epistolar y que, por supuesto, en la epístola erótica es uno de los elementos más fundamentales, que forma parte del género epistolar, digo, de todos los tiempos, incluso en el de los padres de la Iglesia, donde hay determinadas expresiones de tipo erótico que bien podrían ser de un intercambio epistolar heterosexual, y sin embargo pueblan las diferentes colecciones de los epistológrafos bizantinos. En el caso de Enrico Simonetti, a través de un pasaje especialmente precioso del Satiricón de Petronio, nos ha hablado de uno de los temas que a mí personalmente me resulta especialmente atractivo, que es el de la mezcla de géneros, el de la hibridación genérica, no solo en ese primer nivel de intertextualidad que podría ser Ovidio en el caso de estas dos cartas insertas en el Satyricon, sino también de esa parodia de determinadas situaciones de la novela o esos ecos de la comedia, ¿no? Y por último, en el caso de Frosini Tsaku, nos ha hablado de la tradición epistolar bizantina a través de ese episodio de Livistros y Rodamne, un episodio de un intercambio epistolar de 23 epístolas. Nos ha hecho un repaso sobre las diferencias lexicográficas de la terminología epistolar, con algunos términos especialmente simpáticos, y llegando a la conclusión que estas cartas, ya bien entrada la época bizantina, tampoco están exentas de la base retórica que está en el género epistolar desde sus inicios. A vuestra disposición están todos por si queréis hacer algún tipo de comentario o de puntualización. Antonio.
I can start. Frosini, I wanted to ask you, because you talked about the intersectionality of writing and orality, if we know anything about the performative aspect of this novel in the court of Nicaea. Like, was it performed in public? Was it read?
Excellent question. Ευχαριστώ πολύ. I will start directly. No, we don't have evidence. But did the Byzantine novels and romans have a performative value? Yes. Because, for example, Mikhail Pselos is describing that letters were reading as a standard practice in Aegiglios Paideia, in the education tradition of Byzantine. So parts of the letters, yes, were letters from Romans. So we don't have actually evidence, I'm the X that I'm performing that thing, but from the grammarian like Mikhail Pselos, we know that they were performed in public. Thank you.
Thank you.
Παρακαλώ.
Ευχαριστώ. Bueno, pues Elizabeth, the microphone, please.
I had spoken with Antonio earlier about, I was wondering, again, I think picking up on your question of performativity, about where your text, like the context of consumption of your text, or the, like, so audiences and context, and yeah.
So yeah, I think if you take into account that this is the late antique rhetorical and literary culture, which is kind of continuing the trends of the second sophistic, you have these sophists like the literati, that, for instance, for the case of Aristenetos, it's very clear that this is a kind of literature that comes out of Justinianic court, for instance, and I think in Simokata's case, you still have the same educated audience, educated in the same rhetorical pedagogy, and also I think what you've also shown with the use of homoerotic discourse, it shows that these people were still educated in the rhetorical trends of the Hellenistic and imperial period, so they explore this topoi even in new Christian Byzantine contexts. I mean, they repurpose homoerotic desire in different contexts, for instance, to show the assertion of a woman in order to represent a woman as very assertive. They sometimes use this kind of polarity between Erastis and Eromenos, where the woman poses as the Erastis somehow. And this continues the trends of the imperial period, of course. And in this way, I think we see that both the audience and the writers come from this kind of rhetorically educated elite that continues the trend.
Actual context, like rereadings, dining, like I'm just, sorry, the historian.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there is any testimonies from the broader tradition talking about the context, but I am pretty sure that if you read the Progymnasmata, for instance, they kind of hinge to this type of rhetorical education that continues even into the 7th century. I mean, this is early Byzantium we're talking about. It's the beginning of the medieval period for Greek literature, and it really seems that they are still steeped in this same rhetorical education that existed for quite a long period before them, and they culminate something new.
I have a question for Elizabeth. I was very impressed when you said that homoerotic love was banned in the Theodosian Code. I would expect it to be banned in canon law, but I never thought of looking into the Theodosian Code for that. Is that an isolated case, or are there more than one occurrences of this?
Prior to the Theodosian Code, and I'm not by no means a legal scholar, but I mean, I think it's a very curious, I was discussing this with my family before I came out here, but I think it's a curious thing when it happens and why it happens, and the fact that from the Theodosian Code onward, we find invocations of the Hebrew Bible and Sodom, but I don't, these are really, it is something actually innovative. It's fairly new in Theodosius and in the Theodosian Code, to find in legislation that is against same-sex relationships of various types. And then something fascinating that we continue to see on in the time of Justinian is defining gender, and a very contemporary topic. But it does seem to be something that's new, and of course draws upon the Old Testament.
Yes. Yeah. In the Theodosian Code, is this just one law, or are there more than one?
No, there are several laws.
Okay.
And some of them, and they also even involve women too. But there are laws saying that same-sex marriage is illegal, and then sexual acts, and then, and as we can see, as I just said, the Justinian was starting to pick up on gender as well, and kind of get more into the minutiae of things.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Something else? Sorry.
So I have two questions for Elizabeth. I very much like the letter of Meganthius, letter 169 to Procopius. Please, Procopius, write to the lovers of your discourses. So first question, could we say that Procopius' epistolary work have a clear double purpose, like literary and erotic, and does the one element feed back into the other? And the second question is about the last letter, letter 12, that you have Hypódyma and the vivid icon of Eromenos. That reminds me clearly of Philostratus' letter, and you have many specials here. do we have any intertextual evidence of this, if there are some intertextual connections between Philostratus and this?
This is something that Owen was mentioning to me after my. There aren't any, sort of TLG straight, but it's definitely something that I'm going to be looking into in terms of the Philostratus connection and intertextual engagement. But definitely something I'm going to be looking to. But in terms of very clear language, very precise language, no, it's not been found to be very clearly connected to Philistine language specifically. But it's definitely a place that I want to go to. And then in terms of your first question, I apologize if we could circle back to it.
If there is a double purpose, literary and rhetoric, and the one element feed back the other in the whole collection, or no, it's just one incident?
As a communication? This is just a wonderful topic, actually, because, presumably there are little glimmers in the letters of Procopius and Aeneas of public readings of letters, of theatra, like we see in the Byzantine world. There's always this sense that, and we have other glimmers of just kind of like a sort of lateral address of the letters, that these are things that could have been copied by friends and resent and then read at drinking dinner parties or something. So there seem to be kind of traces of that where you can make a case for it. We can't say it would be speculative in this example, and we don't know where Megethius is from exactly. Presumably he's not from Gaza. None of the correspondents are from Gaza. None of the letters survive, and they probably didn't write to each other that much being in the same town. So Megethius is probably going to share whatever Procopius, if he sends that funeral oration after all this time, he's probably going to share it with his friends wherever he is, somewhere in the Greek East. So these letters, it's something that's so wonderful about these letters, as is true, I think, of Byzantine letters, late antique and Byzantine letters in general, is that they have there's so many different reading acts to which we can subject them historically, thinking about them historically.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have two questions, last comment to Elizabeth as well. The one is the comment section is, I'm pretty sure you all know the letters of Marcus Aurelius and Fronto, which are translated by Amy Richlin, and I got the impression that the language is very similar here and that it's like deliberately written in this way to resemble. And the other thing is, my question has to do with this Platonic discourse of love in Phaedrus vis-a-vis writing. How do they interconnect, and how do these letters, they seem to be playing with these notions of the Platonic desire and writing?
Absolutely. Thank you. So your first question was prefigured by Owen again. Beat you to it. But again, in a TLG sense of the explicit language, I don't know of explicit sorts of clear use at all. But it's definitely worth circling back to for me in the future. And then, I'm sorry, your second question just...
The Platonic discourse of writing and eros, how do they interconnect?
I think that there's definitely it's pretty... there is a lot of play here, Paidikon. It really does seem... And that's something I think that is so lovely about these letters, is that kind of the vivacity... They're really fun letters to read, actually. They're hard, but to read in the Greek is hard. But I think definitely there is this sense of social play with the language. Of course, they're always showing off. They're always, thinking of themselves as Hellenes and all that. But definitely, I like yeah, the idea of kind of loosely kind of innovating on that theme there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Io ho una domanda per il professor Vox. Mi scuso perché avevo preso degli appunti ma non li trovo, quindi probabilmente li ho lasciati lì. Volevo chiederle una cosa, appunto scusandomi perché non ho il riferimento esatto sotto mano, che riguardava gli scambi tra Cleopatra e Cesare e Cleopatra e Antonio. Nelle fonti sono descritti in maniera diversa e soprattutto il fatto che ci siano delle lettere erotiche tra i due, per come è descritto nelle fonti, c'è anche una sorta di giudizio negativo nei confronti di Cleopatra, vista l'immagine di Cleopatra solitamente nelle fonti romane, e il giudizio negativo su di lei?
Quel passo che ho indicato è un passo che si riferisce all'arrivo del vincitore Ottaviano da Cleopatra. Cleopatra, per intenerire e sedurre Ottaviano, gli mostra le lettere d'amore di Cesare. Tratta Ottaviano come se fosse il figlio di Cesare. Questa è la tattica che adotta. Ovviamente la fonte tenta di
screditarla.
Questo espediente non avrà successo. Ottaviano subito reagisce a questa lettura delle lettere e alle lacrime nel rievocare queste espressioni d'amore di Cesare, reagisce mostrandosi nettamente disinteressato, quindi non sortisce nessun effetto. Fonte ovviamente che è favorevole al vincitore e deve squalificare. Cleopatra ha una bruttissima stampa, sempre, con qualsiasi uomo abbia a che fare, ha una bruttissima stampa dopo, ovviamente.
Grazie.
Fino a quando? Dobbiamo stare qui?
We had a very intense day, and there is now a guided tour in historic center of Giovinazzo, and then we have dinner at 8:30 at Osteria San Domenico near Piol. Okay? Thank you very much.